So let me repeat good morning now a little bit more loudly. And it's very heartening to see so many of us have interest in scientific equipment and in fact taking stock of scientific equipment. A lot of issues related to scientific equipment and taking stock have already very effectively. So what I would do is I would kind of flag some of these issues in slightly different words, or maybe even similar words. What we want to do is, at the end of this workshop, brainstorming, we want some clarity about certain issues. And I'm sure, I'm certain that with so many bright minds here, with so many ideas, the people, practicing scientists, we all know what the problems are. We now need to look at what their solutions are, as Dr. Mathur said, and Mr. Sengupta very kindly told me that, well, here are the problems, you tell us what the solutions are, right? So it's for each one of us to do very serious, committed thinking about where the solutions are. Clearly, scientific equipment are extremely important. To do good science, to do great science, what do we need? We need creative, out-of-box thinking people like the ones sitting here. We need, creative ideas, out-of-box thinking, and we need, increasingly so in the modern research, we need functioning, effective equipment that can translate our idea into a science that can be published, that can be presented, that can be argued, that can be turned into technology. If you just think about, well, a lot of time, people say, turn of the century and a little bit later, we were producing great scientists in this country. And I say, well, where are those great scientists now, right? Now, partially the reason has been in between, if you look from the 50s onward up to 90s, we were losing this race against scientific equipment and infrastructure. So the early days, you see, ideas mattered a lot more than the hard infrastructure. And so we are pretty much on the same level field as everybody else in the world. That if you look at Raman's spectrometer, for example, it would be something that you can put together yourself, maintain, run, whatever. That was no longer possible beyond 60s. So this is where we were kind of losing ground, and I'm very happy that has picked up again in a big way. Dr. Praveen Arora said that the extramural funding by DST is about 700 crores. In my view, is really, if you look at budget this year or last couple of years, it ought to be greater than 2,500 crores a year, which means if you look at 60% of that and so on, is producing huge amount of infrastructure, scientific equipment, and so on. And that certainly is a way forward to combine our great creative ideas with the right kind of equipment to get there. And I'm sure that this is again happening, that there is a surge of optimism. If you look at last decade, 15 years or so, that science is certainly picking up in terms of infrastructure in the country. In fact, when I joined IIT Kanpur, I was an experimentalist. After joining IIT Kanpur, I became a theorist because there were no resources. There were not large amount of resources coming out either from DST or anywhere else to create the kind of infrastructure that you need for nanotechnology, for example. So you say, okay, well, let us do what we can, right, instead of just worrying about it and complaining about it all the time. But I can clearly see from my own personal experience that starting somewhere, well, I would say about 98, 99, things really picked up, and we haven't looked back since then. So, what differentiates modern science from the ancient science, let's say, giving example of nanotechnology, it's always been there. As we know, windows of cathedral, very vibrant colors come because of nanoparticles. But nanotechnology as a robust science could only become possible because of modern tools of characterization, fabrication, and so on. Look at the rise of STM, AFM, whatever, without which actually nanotechnology would have no identity at all. So we have all been beneficiaries of this wave in a very big way. It is our now social responsibility. We would not social corporate responsibility, but academic social responsibility to now make sure that these equipment out there are effectively used, that we have some policies and vision regarding where these equipment go, how do they grow further, and how do we keep using them. So unless we take a stock, we create database which is open, which is transparent, which is searchable, as has been said, that this is really the very first step in the right direction. And I must congratulate very strongly the team from TERI, as well as the interest of DST in this particular theme, and that they really have pulled it very well. And so we need to do, of course, more, and I would come to it in a second. So we need to take a stock. People who don't know their history cannot plan their future. This is true for what we are discussing today, and it's true for everything that we do in life. So we need to have policies for procurement, policies for use, policies for maintenance, and policies for disposal. So from cradle to grave of all the scientific equipment, and this is precisely what Dr. Mathur actually talked about, and these are actually the crux of the matter. Say how so unless we have this evidence-based base, we could not actually rationally think about what these policies ought to be. We need policies for sharing and accessibility. Clearly, we need to worry about training manpower and skilling. Are we making optimal use of these resources, not just for me and my students, but little bit outside of that circle? So which comes back, with the idea of academic social responsibility. And I think that can be a very powerful concept. In fact, I'm thinking starting this year, projects beyond a certain threshold, let's say beyond 1 crore or something like that, we actually tag in an academic social responsibility clause with it. Now, what does this mean? I mean, it means many different things to different people. It's not a single thing. This academic social responsibility could mean going out there, giving lecture to kids in the schools, pulling in kids to showcase what you are doing, get them interested in research, training people on the infrastructure that we have, not necessarily because they will continue to work in my lab, but that they would actually go out and have this skilled manpower pool, right, to serve all our labs and similar needs. Oftentimes, you go out looking for an operator or a junior scientist to run your machine. It's very, very hard to find those people, right? So isn't it our responsibility actually to run regularly these courses or training modules? And some of them would actually serve us when our current operator leaves, and some of them would go out and equally serve the system. So then, based on this database, we need to plan for the future. We need to identify the gaps, or at least the critical gaps. We say, what kind of equipment are available, which are not available, what is the demand, what is the supply, what's happening out there, how many users, and so on. So in a nutshell, we need evidence-based decision-making. And this is where it all starts, with compiling very robust databases, which has been done to some extent. So I understand that in this study from 2003 to 11, 1,300 institutions were covered, 2,700 extramural projects were covered, 2,500 PIs and heads were consulted, and so on. I do recall getting one of these letters myself. I wouldn't tell you if I replied to it or not. Right. So now, the next question is, we have a good database going up to 2011. So if you look at this time period, 2003 to 11, this database ought to be very useful when you want to look at concerns related to maintenance of equipment. So anything that goes beyond 3-year time frame horizon, then you start worrying about out of AMC, out of original warranty and so on, and then you worry about maintenance aspects. When you want to look at proper utilization of equipment, then we ought to go beyond clearly 2011 now, or is it 2013? Is up to 2013?
Now we are considering up to 2013-14.
13-14, wonderful. So yeah, clearly, so if you have this database which is more recent, then we can actually start looking at the utilization of these equipment even from outsiders. So we need to know where these equipment are, who is operating them, what the policies for their operation are, how do I actually go and book a slot there, right? Now, this question was asked by Dr. Mathur. He said, you know, when you approach someone, you say, hey, I want to use this X-ray, diffractometer, whatever. What are the typical responses? So typical responses would be, well, A, it's not working. B, the operator is not there, or, well, we lost the last operator yesterday and there is nobody right now to actually handle it. My students are extremely busy writing their PhD. Well, we ran out of consumables. That's usually the third one. And the fourth one, well, PI has locked the lab and left, or something like that. I've heard actually all of these and some more in my own experience, and most of these are actually untrue, right? So even though that these reasons are often cited, the bottom line is that we don't want to share equipment, right? That we want to protect our turf. There's always this question that somebody is going to use my equipment to screw it. I mean, what is in it for me? A lot of people actually go out and say, oh, okay, well, if you use this equipment, write me as a co-author, right? Which is actually a horrible practice. Unless we contribute scientifically to research merely because an instrument supplied by DST is used by a third party, does not entitle me to become a co-author. In fact, I installed an AFM, atomic force microscope, back in 2001, which back then was kind of novelty. It was probably second in the country. And since then it has produced, it worked for about 11 years after that, and it's produced about 300 some papers. So you can imagine if I was a co-author in all of these papers, I'd be that much closer to Nobel Prize, right? But anyway, so, and I learned some things actually installing and running that particular facility, one of which was, we said that we are going to charge the users, right? And in 2001, this was kind of, you know, very unorthodox, revolutionary idea. And I got a lot of love mail or hate mail or letters, you know, flying all over saying, well, that this is a publicly supported equipment, so how can you charge money for its use? Clearly, well, I explained to people that resources there, we're not charging you for the equipment, we are charging you for the manpower that's going to run it, consumables that we need to do this, and some part of maintenance. My idea was, well, if you raise 50% of your maintenance and other consumable resources from users, then you can approach someone else, maybe DST Institute somewhere, saying, look, we are raising 50%, you contribute 50%. And it usually worked quite well in that, right? It also works quite well when you charge users because you don't have frivolous samples actually turning over. People otherwise would come in with hundreds of samples. They have no clue what these samples are, but it's free. So I say, oh, and you know, well, if you can't do it, then they would criticize you. They would be very angry, say, you are not getting my job done, right? And so people expect, you know, this kind of free service from people. We should actively discourage it. Say, you have to be an equal participant in this process. So, you know, when the equipment goes down, we actually have some money to go about fixing it, right? Those kind of things. We also come to this, the thing about maintenance is very tricky. In fact, our institutions are graveyards of these scientific equipment. And many of them are fixable, they can be fixed, but you see either the PI, the scientist left, or he or she lost interest in it, or there simply was for 2 crore equipment, there were not 10 lakhs available to fix it. Once one of these things happen and it goes down for 1 year, it stays down, right? And that's the end of it. Now then, the next person, I've also heard that, it's easier to get new equipment from DST than to get maintenance money, right? And that can certainly be true. So, then people say, okay, don't worry about this, let's write new proposal, get a new equipment, right? So these are real serious problems, and I'm sure that there are real solutions to these problems if we put our minds together. It's a very serious national issue, because look at the huge investment and resources, not just by DST, DBT, ICMR, ICAR, whole lot of ministries out there are sinking in enormous resources. And I have a feeling that the end of 5 years, 3 years down the road, that only half of it actually remains effective. And it is our duty to make sense of this whole situation, to have policies that would allow the continued use of these resources. Ease of use is very extremely important. So we want to get we want to make it part of the grant. He said, look, I talked about this academic or scientific social responsibility. And this is allowing, with some ease, use by outsiders of certain time on this equipment. In addition to training, mentoring, reaching out, outreach, pulling in people, and so on. Now, I understand, in fact, IIT Madras director, E. Bhaskar, he talked to me about there are many equipment of high value, 10 crore, 20 crore, 50 crores. They can, in fact, be remotely operated. In fact, all these big facilities, mega projects, international ones, they are at least partially remotely accessible and operatable. What that means is, well, maybe you just have to ship a sample, and then you can actually set the equipment, you can play around with the settings, you can give instructions and so on. So a whole lot of time actually which is wasted in traveling and pleading with people and so on, it ought to be avoided. And another way to avoid that is to have transparency in booking. So I would expect that everything where we support an equipment worth more than 1 crore, it ought to be displayed on a website saying, here, these are the slots which are available for next 2 months. So you just go there, you book the slot, well, you pay by credit card or whatever, or, that probably we have not reached there yet. But anyway, it has to be something which is transparent, which is easy to book, and not people first running to actually make a booking, and half the time they are not successful actually in doing that and so on. So, we can't rely on, goodness of somebody's heart to do this, but we have to make it systematic, right? We have to put it in terms of policies, in terms of a system that actually works, and that there is no way of getting around that. We ought to be also looking at use by industry on a higher payment on the actual, like the real cost of using that equipment. And many people are doing that very successfully, and this could be a good way both to serve industry which cannot afford these sophisticated equipment on their own, as well as their maintenance and running. So we would do a huge service to our startup India, make in India industry, everything, if we actually allow the uses by serious industry. It will also bring in more projects from industry into academia. We need to have allow the use by startups which are in all over the campus. In fact, the startups in our campuses would be successful if they can leverage the infrastructure around them, very substantial infrastructure. We can actually pull in startups, we can connect with the startups, technology startups, in 2 different ways, allowing them the use of this equipment, but also maybe generating some startups that take care of maintenance. I have been actually, for nearly 7 years now, I've been talking to students in IITs and trying to motivate them to have startups which take care of servicing our, these state-of-the-art equipment, whether it's electron microscope, whatever it is. I have not been very successful in doing that, I have to agree. Now, you see, when we buy these scientific equipment, most of the Indian agents, they don't really know much science about the equipment. They sell, I hope that there are no equipment sellers here. But even if they are, I would tell them the same thing, that we don't have actually, we are not focused on the science of using scientific equipment. We are focused on selling them and getting AMCs later. So if our own students who have been using these equipment day in and day out, if they actually get into this space, they would do a splendid job. And then, you know, half the time our equipment would not be down and we would use them more efficiently for the science that we want out of these equipment. In fact, I have had some partial success in that. So we had a startup which is making some nanotechnology equipment. I mentored that. And I said, look, what is your unique selling point? Your unique selling point has to be, I'm not just selling the equipment, I'm also selling the science with it, right? So most people just sell the equipment, but you say, look, sir, madam, what is your science? I can actually, because I've done PhD in that, I can actually tell you how to effectively use this equipment to spin out nanofibers, to spin out some papers using that, right? So if you have, you know, this approach, that would be far more effective than simply, well, I mean, just, you know, putting the equipment there and disappearing, right? So we need to actually encourage in our system companies like that coming up, which are scientific, really. Online bookings we talked about, yeah. Of course, it was pointed out that 92% of our equipment are imported, or 94%, right, something like that. Anyway, it's a very large proportion. And this is not going to disappear unless we had this, first, these people who are getting trained on these equipment, get into their maintenance, and then they can graduate slowly into making some of these equipment themselves. So it's a little bit of a gradual process that we need to build capacity in terms of people with a certain expertise. As they gain more expertise and confidence, they can have a startup and graduate to a company. I should also share with you, since we're talking about equipment, scientific equipment and startups, the good news that you know, our budget for innovation and startups in DST has gone up by 500% this year. Which is very heartening. What it also means is, well, if anybody has a good idea, he says, well, that I would maintain or make these equipment, we can actually give seed funding of about up to 1 crore, which is a good starting point, and a whole lot of other things, you know, training, mentoring, accelerating, what have you, right? So this is really the right time to actually push in that particular direction in context of scientific equipment. We cannot forever be importing, because it's not just that you have anything against importing per se. It's just about the maintaining these equipment after importing them. Because every time you have to pull out a guy from Germany or US, UK, that's not going to happen very easily, and so the equipment remain down for 6 months or beyond, right? So unless we have this strength in our system, the scientific strength, the strength to maintain equipment, to repair equipment, in fact, to even you know, tinker with them, take them apart, make their capacity even better, and so on, we are going to be forever in this buy and junk mode, right? Not go much beyond that. So now I would just quickly close this. Just one point that I forgot to mention, that we have database now going up to 2013. To have this up to date, what is it that we need to do? So I was thinking, well, as you know, our annual reports come in, the projects, we should start capturing data at that particular point, because all the equipment purchased, their make, model, money, what they do, etc., free time available, this all there, right? So it should really be an ongoing process rather than once in 10-year exercise. So let us actually evolve a model that's keeping track of things every month, if not every day or week, and say that here is our database which is continuously updated. We can, let's think about how we can partner in that process of having actually an ongoing process rather than doing it just once in a while. So we need a comprehensive and updated database because the first 3 years of equipment and its uses are very critical, right? Beyond 5 years, they start going down slowly, and so we should get all the juice out in the first 5 years, 80% out in first 5 years. Who knows? Technology changes, models change, doesn't work, whatever happens, people move, right? So we must target the last 5 years of an equipment are most critical. We must have database continuously updated on that. And then, of course, based on all this, that your brainstorming would produce what kind of policies are required. I would reiterate, for equipment procurement, maintenance, use, disposal. I have some ideas. Maybe just one random idea. In disposing of equipment, right now it's just write-off and it's just sold as a junk for 2 rupees, what costs 2 crores. Can we actually cannibalize some of this? Can we recycle? Can we even make a museum? Can we send it out to colleges? If it still has some functionality left, right, can it be used? In fact, it was very interesting. Some people did approach me and said, look, if you can donate these old, even non-functioning equipment, while that this can be greatly useful, we in fact setting up a museum and some stuff, and you can pull out some old parts, things like that. Unfortunately, when I looked at our policies, it was not really possible, right? So you say, well, that the disposal and the stuff is, what is called this tedious process of write-off, right? People get written off much faster than the equipment do, right? I've seen people, they use this equipment when they were young, they are retired, but the equipment is still there, and also taking up the precious space, all these graveyards of equipment contributes to that. For maintenance, often it has been suggested that the granting agency like DST should also provide money for maintenance, which is a very valid point, and as a PI, I often argued that very strongly, that certainly is needed. However, there are pros and cons of this. The pros are, of course, clear. You have ready money for maintenance, so you can take care of any problem when it comes. The con is you only have this amount of money, this kitty. Now you can divide it any which way you like. You can support more new projects or maintain more old projects, right? Either way is not going to make scientists universally happy, no matter what you do, right? So now my solution was that so DST should support, of course, the cost of equipment and its first 3 to 5 years of maintenance. Beyond that period, you have two options. If that equipment is still useful and the PI is still doing work, effective work, you can write up, of course, another project which makes use of that resource and say, now, okay, for maintaining this resource, that this money you need, this is the most used model. Sometimes people argue that, well, that they should really get maintenance money without justifying it. That is, justifying either the use of the equipment, its continuous use of the equipment, and scientifically what it would produce, right? So that position is a little bit hard to justify. But in any case, the other way to do it would be, let us say if your resource is in some MHRD institution, then MHRD could possibly, or the ministry whose institution it is, could provide money for the maintenance. So the model would be, if this institute got, let's say, 100 crores of fund from outside, then 5% of that is set aside by that ministry for maintaining the infrastructure. This will also actually reward those institutions that pull in more money for the infrastructure from outside. So in a kind of sense that they are a little bit rewarded more. I have had actually talks about this with MHRD secretaries, successive secretaries, last 3, and I'm still hoping that something like this that this might work in the future. So of course the future is that we now should make a comprehensive continuous database, not only for DST, but because there are so many other sources of funding and creation of infrastructure, how do we pull all of them in? And the hope is maybe not now, but couple of years from now, you have a very comprehensive website, searchable, transparent. You reach out to any large resource around the country and know what the capabilities are, when is it available, who is in charge, how do I book it, when is it available, how much do I pay? I mean, this is where we ought to move really. Unless we are able to do this, we would remain with many of these problems that we have discussed now, and we have been discussing for many years, and I hope that we don't continue to discuss them for more than next 2 years, that we do indeed find very robust solutions that actually work. So on a lighter note, this reminds me of another very burning problem of this kind, which is called academia-industry interaction. When I just first joined IIT Kanpur in '90, there was a big conference on industry-academia interaction, and it has produced a volume, and if I open that volume today, it's still very relevant, and we still have the same conferences. Some of the very same people also go to these conferences and say very similar things, right? So more things change, more they remain the same. I really do wish very, very strongly that we actually evolve some concrete actions now, and with your wisdom, with your energy and activism, all of us here, right, that we get there sooner than later. Thank you very much indeed.